Brandon Clarke's cause of death has finally been revealed months after his sudden passing at 29. Officials say the Grizzlies forward died from the effects of heroin and cocaine. And from Ja Morant to Jaren Jackson Jr., NBA players are reacting to the heartbreaking loss. The call came in that evening, a 911 dispatch for a medical emergency in the San Fernando Valley. Paramedics rolling up to a quiet residential address, and inside, a 29-year-old professional athlete who wasn't moving. The Los Angeles Fire Department responded to a 911 call of a medical emergency shortly after 5 p.m. And when paramedics arrived, they declared Clarke dead. Drug paraphernalia turned up in the house. Investigators opened a file labeled possible overdose and started waiting on lab results. That was the beginning. Months of silence followed, the kind of silence that lets speculation fill in every gap. Then, this week, the wait ended. Clarke died of an accidental overdose, according to the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner, and it was determined that his cause of death was the combined effects of heroin and cocaine, ruled an accident. The medical examiner's office added a second layer to the finding. It also listed combined effects of multiple prescription medications as another significant condition related to his death, though it did not specify the medications in question. No foul play, no mystery assailant, just a body, a bedroom, and a toxicology report that finally had a name for what happened. Clarke was found unresponsive at a home in Los Angeles' San Fernando Valley on the evening of May 11, and paramedics found him in a bedroom before pronouncing him dead at the scene. Within hours of the news first breaking back in May, the NBA didn't wait for an official ruling to start grieving. Jaren Jackson Jr., who'd come up through the Memphis system standing shoulder to shoulder with Clarke for years, posted something raw. He wrote that he couldn't imagine a world where this was even possible, that he loved Clarke forever, that the whole thing felt devastating, and that he just wished he could talk to him one more time. That single post became, in the words of one report, a gathering point for players across the NBA, with current and former teammates sharing their grief. Ja Morant answered first. Morant had spent 7 seasons on the same roster as Clarke, the two of them arriving in Memphis around the same time and growing into the core of a franchise together. He didn't write a long statement. He replied to Jackson's post with 4 words and 2 emojis: "Love your brother, a blue heart, a bandaged heart." But that was just the reply. Morant had already posted his own tribute earlier that day, a string of photos and videos from years of games and locker rooms, captioned with a message that read in part that the loss hurt, that Clarke was gone way too soon, and that it was bigger than basketball. Scottie Pippen Jr., another Grizzlies guard who'd shared a locker room with Clarke, kept his message short too. He wrote simply, "Rip brother, you will be missed, gone too soon." Jalen Wells, one of the newer faces on the roster, framed his tribute around what he'd actually witnessed day to day. He said that everything Clarke had gone through in the time Wells had been in Memphis, Clarke still came in with a smile on his face and was a light in the locker room, calling him a truly inspiring person and adding that Memphis wouldn't be the same without him. And then there was Kyle Anderson, who didn't bother cleaning up his language for the post. He wrote that he was hurt, man, really hurt, calling Clarke his dog, his Virgo twin, saying he loved him so much and wished he could have been there for him. It wasn't polished, it wasn't a press release, it read like exactly what it was: a guy losing a friend in real time, in public, because that's where NBA players process things now. This is the part that separates Clarke's death from a typical league tragedy. It wasn't just a franchise mourning a former player, it was a specific, tight circle of teammates: Morant, Jackson, Pippen, Wells, Anderson, publicly working through grief for a guy they'd shared buses, flights, and playoff runs with, all while the cause of his death remained an open question for months. The reactions came before the science did. The love came before the explanation. The Grizzlies organization and Priority Sports confirmed Clarke's death after the 7-year NBA veteran died in the Los Angeles area, and the sudden loss reverberated shockwaves throughout the NBA community, with teammates, league officials, and fans mourning one of the team's most respected players and locker room leaders. The team itself put out a statement calling him heartbroken by the tragic loss of Brandon Clarke, describing him as an outstanding teammate and an even better person whose impact on the organization and the greater Memphis community would not be forgotten, and expressing deepest condolences to his family and loved ones. For a guy who'd spent his career as a supporting piece, a high-energy forward who never made an all-star team, but who every locker room he passed through described as essential, the outpouring said something. It wasn't about stats. It was about who he was between the whistles. But here's what makes this story harder to sit with. The overdose finding didn't come out of nowhere. There was a chapter before May 11 that a lot of people missed or dismissed or hoped was just a rough patch. It involved a highway in Arkansas, a car going triple digits, and a bag of something that shouldn't have been in that car at all. To understand how a beloved teammate ends up in a bedroom with heroin and cocaine in his system, you have to go back further to the guy Brandon Clarke actually was before any of this happened, and to the warning signs nobody wanted to read as warning signs. Brandon Clarke didn't arrive in the NBA as a finished product or a hyped prospect. He built his way there the long way, and that grind is part of why the locker room loved him so much. Clarke was a Canadian-American professional basketball player who played power forward for the Memphis Grizzlies of the NBA. Born in Vancouver in September of 1996, he grew up bouncing between Canada and Arizona, eventually landing at Desert Vista High School in Phoenix before college recruiters really started paying attention. He played college basketball for the San Jose State Spartans and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. 2 stops, not one, which tells you he wasn't a program's instant centerpiece. He transferred, sat out a year under NCAA rules, and had to prove himself again from scratch at Gonzaga. It worked. By the time he left college, he'd stacked up a resume that read like a defensive stopper's dream. WCC Defensive Player of the Year, WCC Newcomer of the Year, and a spot on the 3rd-team All-American list. Scouts loved his motor. He wasn't the flashiest athlete in the draft class, but he moved like someone who refused to take a possession off on either end of the floor. Clarke was selected by the Oklahoma City Thunder in the first round of the 2019 NBA draft with the 21st overall pick, and then immediately traded to the Grizzlies. That trade turned into the defining transaction of his career. He never suited up for anyone else. Memphis became home, and home became a place where a rookie forward found himself thrown straight into featured minutes on a team that was quietly rebuilding around 2 other young pieces, Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. The 3 of them clicked almost immediately. Within Clarke's first year, all 3 were named to the same All-Star showcase for young talent, a signal that Memphis had stumbled into or drafted its way into a genuine core. The trio of Morant, Jackson Jr., and Clarke became one of the most exciting young cores in the NBA with the Grizzlies' fast-paced offense. Clarke wasn't the headline guy in that trio. He didn't need to be. He filled the gaps, put-back dunks, weak side blocks, hustle plays that showed up on box scores as unremarkable numbers but showed up in film sessions as winning basketball. He made the all-rookie first team in 2020 and went on to average 10.2 points and 5.5 rebounds over 309 career games, all of them in a Grizzlies uniform. He finished 4th in Rookie of the Year voting during that 2019-20 season and went on to carve out a key role, serving as a smart, high-energy complement to young stars Morant and Jackson Jr. He was never going to be the guy defense's game planned around. He was the guy that made the guys defense's game planned around actually function. Then the injuries started, and they didn't stop. In recent years, injuries struck. He missed more than a full calendar year of action with a torn Achilles in 2023 and 2024. That kind of injury ends careers for lesser athletes. Clarke fought back from it, returned to the floor, and looked like himself again for a stretch. Then his knee gave out. The Grizzlies announced that Clarke had been diagnosed with a high-grade PCL sprain in his right knee, sustained during a fall to the floor against the Portland Trail Blazers, and he was expected to miss the remainder of that season. It was the second significant lower body injury of his career. He'd already torn the Achilles tendon in his left leg late in the 2022-23 season. Every time he clawed his way back into rotation minutes, his body found a new way to shut the door. By the following season, the pattern had become brutal. The arrest that would eventually make headlines came at the end of a lost season for the 29-year-old Clarke, who had played only 2 games over the entire 2025-26 campaign. He missed the beginning of the season while dealing with knee inflammation, then sustained a calf injury in his second game back that prevented him from playing since. Picture that for a second. A professional athlete, a guy who built his entire identity on relentless motion and high-energy hustle plays, spending an entire season watching from the bench because his body kept betraying him. A return had seemed possible after that calf strain healed, but the Grizzlies announced that he would miss the remainder of the season, after new imaging showed he needed additional healing to be cleared for high-intensity court work. That's not just a stat line, that's a man sitting in a training room, watching Morant and Jackson run the offense he used to be part of. wondering if his career was quietly ending in real time. He was tied for the longest tenure on the roster. He was tied with Ja Morant as the longest tenured player on the current roster, which meant he'd watched the franchise transform around him while his own role kept shrinking against his will. This is the context nobody puts in the highlight reels. Clarke wasn't just rehabbing a knee or an Achilles, he was rehabbing an identity. Athletes who define themselves by physical output, by being first off the bench, by diving for loose balls, by setting the tone with energy, don't handle forced stillness well. And Clarke had years of forced stillness stacked on top of each other. Achilles, calf, knee, Achilles, again in effect. The body that made him valuable had become, season after season, the thing that kept betraying him. By the spring of what should have been his 8th year in the league, Brandon Clarke wasn't the smiling energy guy climbing box scores anymore. He was a former all-rookie forward stuck rehabbing on the sideline of a team that was moving on without him, tied to a max-caliber contract extension he'd signed years earlier during healthier times, a 4-year, $52 million extension he'd signed with the Grizzlies, but unable to earn it back on the floor. That's the man who, weeks before his death, ended up on a highway in rural Arkansas doing well over 100 miles an hour with a state trooper behind him. Cross County, Arkansas is not a place NBA players typically end up making headlines. It's about 50 miles from Memphis, mostly farmland, the kind of stretch of highway where speed limits exist because there's nothing else to slow anyone down. On the 1st of April, that's exactly where Brandon Clarke was booked into county jail. Clarke was arrested on charges that included possession of a controlled substance and fleeing in excess of the speed limit. The full charge sheet, once it came out, read worse than a routine traffic stop. The Cross County Sheriff's Department logged Clarke as booked into jail for improper passing, possession of a controlled substance, fleeing and exceeding the speed limit, and trafficking a controlled substance. Trafficking is not the same charge as possession, it signals volume, and the volume here was significant. Sources told the Daily Memphian that Clarke allegedly hit 100-mile-per-hour app during a high-speed chase and reportedly had more than 200 grams of kratom in his car. Kratom sits in a strange legal gray zone depending on the state. It comes from a tree native to Southeast Asia, and its leaves can be used as a stimulant or sedative depending on the amount used, and it can also lead to psychotic symptoms and psychological and physiological dependence, according to the DEA. Kratom is considered illegal in Arkansas, where Clarke was arrested, though its legality varies from state to state, for a player already sidelined the entire season with injuries. This wasn't just a legal problem, it was a flare going up. A man running from police at triple-digit speeds with that quantity of a substance in his vehicle wasn't behaving like someone managing a minor injury setback. He was behaving like someone in crisis. The Grizzlies organization's public response was almost eerily muted. "I'm aware of the report, but don't have any comments," Grizzlies coach Tuomas Isalo said prior to his team's game in New York. That's the standard corporate deflection every franchise trots out when a player's off-court trouble collides with an in-season schedule. Nobody wanted to speculate publicly. Nobody wanted to be the one connecting dots that, at the time, still felt speculative. The arrest came at the end of a lost season, a season defined entirely by rehab, setbacks, and isolation from the team he'd spent 7 years building with. He'd already been ruled out for the year before the arrest even happened. There was no game to suit up for, no minutes to fight for, nothing pulling him back toward the structure that basketball usually provides even to injured players. Practice schedules, treatment appointments, the daily rhythm of being part of a team. Instead, there was an empty calendar, a body that kept failing him, and according to arrest records, a car doing 100 miles an hour on a back highway carrying a quantity of a controlled substance that Arkansas law treats as trafficking, not personal use. He'd missed the beginning of the season with knee inflammation, then sustained a calf injury in his second game back in December that had prevented him from playing since. By April, 5 months had passed without him touching an NBA floor in a meaningful way. He was released after booking, according to reports at the time, and the story faded from the news cycle relatively quickly. Clarke was reportedly released from jail following his arrest. No suspension was announced. No public statement from Clarke himself circulated widely. The charges sat there, a matter of public record, while the season limped to its close without him. In hindsight, that arrest reads less like an isolated bad decision and more like the visible edge of something that had been building under the surface for a while. The kind of pattern that from the outside looks like one bad night, but from public health data on athletes managing chronic injury and pain, looks like the beginning of a much more familiar story. Professional athletes recovering from repeated major injuries, Achilles tears, PCL sprains, calf strains stacked one on top of another, are frequently prescribed powerful pain management regimens for years at a stretch. When an athlete's official medical record includes a note about combined effects of multiple prescription medications contributing to his eventual death, and when that same athlete had a documented run-in with law enforcement involving a controlled substance just weeks earlier, the through line isn't hard to trace, even if nobody drew it explicitly at the time. 5 weeks. That's roughly how much time passed between Clarke's booking photo circulating out of Cross County and the phone call that brought paramedics to a house in the San Fernando Valley. 5 weeks between a highway chase and a bedroom where a 29-year-old was found unresponsive. Nobody connected those two moments in real time. The arrest was treated as an isolated embarrassment for a franchise already dealing with a lost season. The death, when it came, was treated separately. A shock, a tragedy, a how could this happen moment. It's only with the medical examiner's final ruling that the full shape of the timeline becomes visible. An athlete cycling through catastrophic injuries for 3 straight years, a documented brush with law enforcement over controlled substances, and then weeks later, an ending that toxicology now says involved heroin, cocaine, and prescription medication, all acting on his body at once. The evening of May 11 started like any other for the people around Clarke. He was in Los Angeles, away from Memphis, away from the team facility, in a private home in the San Fernando Valley. What exactly happened inside those walls before the 9/11 call went out is still, even now, only partially reconstructed through official statements. Memphis Grizzlies forward and 7-year NBA veteran Brandon Clarke died in the San Fernando Valley, and according to authorities, the Los Angeles Fire Department responded to a 911 call of a medical emergency shortly after 5 p.m. By the time paramedics reached him, there was nothing left to do. The medical examiner's office said paramedics found Clarke in a bedroom, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. TMZ's sourcing pinned the exact window even tighter. Clarke was found unresponsive in his bedroom around 5 p.m., and paramedics responded and pronounced him dead at 5:15 p.m. 15 minutes. That's the entire window between the call going out and the call ending in the worst possible way. There was no ambulance ride, no hospital, no chance for intervention. Whatever combination of substances was working through his system had already done its damage long before anyone dialed for help. Investigators moved carefully in the immediate aftermath. Drug paraphernalia was found in the home, and the incident was being investigated as a possible overdose, with an autopsy to be performed to determine the cause and manner of death. Narcotics had been found at the scene, and there was no evidence of foul play. Sources told ABC News at the time. That distinction mattered enormously to how the story would be covered in the months that followed. This wasn't a crime committed against him. It was, as far as investigators could tell almost immediately, something that happened because of what he'd taken. Alone, in a bedroom, on a Monday evening. Clarke had recently been arrested in Arkansas on charges including speeding and possession of a controlled substance, a detail that outlets folded into their initial coverage almost as a footnote. A strange coincidence rather than a connected chapter of the same unraveling story. At the time, nobody had toxicology results. Nobody could say with certainty what killed him. All anyone had was a body, an empty house, and a rapidly spreading wave of grief across a league that had watched this player grow up in real time, from an undersized college transfer to a 7-year NBA veteran. His agency, Priority Sports, confirmed the news, and the Grizzlies issued their statement mourning a player they called irreplaceable in the locker room. The confirmation set off the wave of tributes described earlier. Jackson, Morant, Pippen, Wells, Anderson, and dozens of others across the league who crossed paths with Clarke over 7 seasons of All-Star weekends, playoff series, and shared locker rooms on the road. But confirmation of death is different from confirmation of cause, and for months the why hung open. Authorities were investigating the case, with early reports pointing to a possible overdose, though an official cause of death had not yet been confirmed pending autopsy and toxicology results. That gap between the tragedy and the explanation is where speculation usually runs wildest in sports media, but this time, the family and the Grizzlies organization mostly kept quiet, letting the medical examiner's office do its work without public pressure to rush a conclusion. It took roughly 3 months for that conclusion to become official. When it did, the medical examiner didn't hedge. The county determined the cause of death for the 29-year-old professional basketball player to be the effects of heroin and cocaine. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office announced that Clarke died from the effects of heroin and cocaine, deeming the drugs to be the official cause of death, which it ruled an accident. Accidental. Not a deliberate act, not something anyone intended to be fatal, just a body that couldn't survive what had been put into it. Whether through injury-driven prescription reliance, recreational use, or some combination, investigators chose not to spell out in detail. The office also listed combined effects of multiple prescription medications as another significant condition related to his death, though it did not specify which medications were involved. That detail matters. It suggests his system wasn't just fighting off two-street drugs, it was managing a cocktail that likely included legitimate medical treatment layered on top of substances that had no business being mixed with it. His cause and manner of death were officially certified on a Friday this past week, closing a chapter that had stayed open since that call went out in the San Fernando Valley. For the players who'd spent months carrying grief without an explanation, the ruling didn't undo anything. It just gave the loss a shape. There's a strange thing that happens when an athlete's death gets an official cause months after the fact. The first wave of grief already happened. The tributes were already posted. The tears already shed publicly on Instagram stories. The flowers already placed. The first flowers were placed under Brandon Clarke's banner back in May, long before anyone outside the medical examiner's office knew what heroin and cocaine had to do with any of it. So when the toxicology results finally landed, they didn't reopen a wound that had healed. They confirmed a fear that had been sitting quietly underneath the grief the entire time. Everyone who'd read about the Arkansas arrest in April had done the math, even if nobody said it out loud in a public statement. A trafficking charge, a 100-mile-an-hour chase, and then, 5 weeks later, a death being investigated as a possible overdose. That arithmetic doesn't require a medical degree. What it required was patience, and the NBA world largely gave it that. There wasn't a wave of think pieces demanding immediate answers. There wasn't public pressure on the Grizzlies to explain themselves. The organization that had drafted him, developed him, handed him a $52 million extension, and watched him tear through 3 separate major injuries. Let the process play out, issuing one statement in May and letting the medical examiner's office do its job without interference. That silence says something about how the league has learned, slowly and painfully, to handle stories like this one. A decade ago, a story involving an NBA player, a drug arrest, and a fatal overdose would have been treated as scandal first, tragedy second. This time, across nearly every report that circulated once the cause of death became public, the framing stayed remarkably consistent. A talented, well-liked teammate, a body worn down by years of catastrophic injury, and an ending that fit a pattern seen across professional sports far too often. Athletes managing chronic pain and diminished identity with substances that eventually overwhelm them. Clarke's statistical legacy will read modestly next to the league's biggest names. A power forward for the Memphis Grizzlies. Career totals of 3,144 points and 1,689 rebounds across his 7 seasons. A good role player, never a star, never chasing that kind of spotlight. But the reaction from his peers told a different story about his value. Teammates who could have offered a passing condolence instead posted photos, videos, years-old memories, private nicknames like Virgo Twin that only make sense to people who actually lived in a locker room together. That's not the kind of grief you perform for cameras. That's the kind that leaks out because it's real. The Grizzlies now move forward with a hole in their organizational memory. Clarke had been there since the trade that brought him over in 2019, tied with Morant as the longest tenured player on the roster. A bridge between the franchise's rebuild years and whatever comes next. Whoever wears his number going forward inherits a locker that used to belong to a guy who, according to nearly every teammate who spoke publicly, showed up with a smile even when his body was falling apart around him. There's no tidy way to close a story like this. The cause of death is no longer a mystery. Heroin, cocaine, prescription medications working together on a body that had already been pushed through years of surgeries and rehab and forced stillness. The Arkansas arrest, once treated as an odd footnote, now reads as the clearest signal anyone had that something was seriously wrong. And the reactions from Morant, Jackson, Pippen, Wells, and Anderson stand as the record of how the people who actually knew him chose to remember him. Not through the arrest record, not through the medical examiner's report, but through the guy who kept showing up with energy even during the worst stretch of his career. What's left is a 29-year-old who spent 7 years making a franchise better without ever needing the credit for it. A body of work that outlasts the headlines about his final months. And a league that for once seemed to understand grief doesn't need an explanation to be real. The explanation came later. The love came first. And for the people who actually shared a locker room with Clarke, that order was never going to change.